I'm Jeff Leitner, a co-founder and director of UX for Good. I am not a designer like you. I'm more of a design groupie.
And I'm Jason Ulasic, the other co-founder and director of UX for Good. And I'm a designer, so I'll translate. It's 2010, and we're both working at an agency. I'm a UX designer working on a variety of design projects with corporate clients, and he's trying to save the world and running our strategy practice. We're both working late at night. We don't really know each other, but we find ourselves at the same copier. Out of the blue, he asks me, hey, have you guys ever done anything to really help people, or do you just design websites and online shopping carts? At first, I wanted to punch him, but I thought better about that. But like a good designer, I figured we needed to prototype an idea. So we brought together 50 local designers in Chicago to experiment. We gave the designers a brief about a social challenge related to unemployment supported by a local nonprofit, and then we let the designers go. It was wild. The ideas were audacious and creative. We recorded them and shared them with the local nonprofit, and almost immediately we got a note back from them with an excited and surprised, "What is this? This is unreal. And who are you?" And that was the beginning of a wild ride we're still on. We've been around the world and worked with lots of brilliant designers and big thinkers on ridiculous challenges. But we'll get to that.
Over thousands of years, the brief for designers has expanded quite a bit, from pottery to manuscripts to giant Gothic cathedrals to websites and to whole businesses. Now we need you to help solve the biggest, most important problems in the world. I used to be a newspaper reporter, and when I left to start the next part of my career, I had a lot of reporters calling me and asking me how they might transition to whatever's next. So I met with each of them individually, and I asked each one of them, what do you think you're great at? And they all answered the same way. They said, I'm a great writer. And I said, no. There are a lot of great writers in the world. Reporters can do something unique. Reporters can go into a room where they don't know anything and walk out with an understanding so deep that they can turn around and explain it to the rest of us. I think designers are the same way. I think you guys are great at things you don't really understand that you're great at. So let's look at some of those.
We can see things that don't exist yet. Think about that. We're like children who imagine monsters and fairies, but we imagine designs and solutions that nobody has ever seen before. People describe things to us, usually badly, and we can see them in our mind's eye fully realized. You think that's normal? It's not. Consider the kids you went to high school with. How many of them can do that?
Designers draw inspiration from everywhere. Trees and movie posters and conversations with your friends and articles you've read. You are intellectually and creatively promiscuous. You wander outside your field and collect scraps and inspirations that appear to have nothing at all to do with what you're designing. Think about it. Accountants don't do that, and bus drivers don't do that. The vast majority of scientists don't do that. It's something unique that only artists and designers do.
We intuitively understand the power of constraints. Everybody in every profession deals with constraints, mostly to complain about them. But to us, they're like magic. Constraints in space or culture or users or even budgets make us more dangerous. We know how to play with constraints, to add them, to remove them, to change them.
Sure, you might be great in design, but chances are that you're not an expert in whatever you're designing for, whatever's in that book or package or in that building or on that website. And you're generally cool with that. Just like a reporter I was talking about before, you can wander into a room where everybody is debating the finer points of something they're all expert in and make sense of what you need to do. And that, my friends, is a superpower, because experts get in ruts they can't get out of. They inherit ways of thinking about the world from whoever the experts were before them. but then you can see other paths that experts can't see.
This may sound weird to you, but we throw things away. We try a design, it doesn't work, so we toss it or delete it. Our designs are just theories about how to do something, and most of the time, the theories are wrong. So we start over and try another theory. Anybody who has been a designer long enough knows that most of what we create isn't right, either because we don't like it or because, God forbid, the client doesn't like it. And to us, that's okay. We learn to take lots of shots, to take lots of theories.
Finally, you can do something that I can't do. I have dreams and big crazy ideas, but I can't make them real. I don't have the chops that you have and probably take for granted for realizing what's in your imagination, from making an idea into something tangible and useful. Look, I'm not being modest. I'm really good at what I do, but the ideas in my head stay in my head if I'm not working with a designer.
So now that you know why designers matter so much, let's talk about 5 big lessons we've learned from tackling social problems.
One, don't try to solve the problem everybody else is trying to solve. The problem is almost never what everybody thinks it is. You're a designer. Rotate the page, flip the image, look at the problem differently. It's so tempting to follow their lead, the experts who've been working on the problem for years or decades. But if they knew what they were doing, they would have solved the problem by now. One day, the Dalai Lama gives a speech at a giant stadium in Vancouver.
You are the seed of better future.
And in that speech, he calls on the world to educate the hearts and not just the minds of children. So an institution there, run by folks in his inner circle, develop a curriculum for public schools about mindfulness. It's years worth of work by scientists and monks and educators, and it goes nowhere. The Dalai Lama can't get his curriculum into the public schools. So we get involved, and our team of brilliant designers do what designers do: sit in classrooms, talk to teachers, and observe students. And that's when we saw it. While nobody had adopted the mindfulness curriculum, there were teachers using it unofficially, and their classrooms were calmer and better behaved. The Dalai Lama's people were trying to solve the wrong problem. You see, this wasn't a curriculum problem. It was a classroom management problem. What we observed is that teachers were sharing with each other in the teacher's lounge or after work how to calm down their classrooms using mindfulness. And so we made it easier for them to do it. Just solve a better problem. For my money, the better problem is almost always more audacious. Zoom out and get crazy. Form follows fantasy. Don't shoot for incremental improvement like everybody else. Shoot for eradicating the problem from the face of the earth. Here's why, and you already know this intuitively. Changing your objective from a 1% improvement to a 100% improvement changes the physics of the whole problem and forces you to consider a different set of solutions. And remember, the experts can't do this. They're locked into a decades-old definition of the problem, and they're locked into tinkering on the edges.
You know, when Avery was first diagnosed, and I was like, oh, I held the insurance, and I would be in my room with specialty pharmacies, insurance companies, yelling at people, screaming at people. I mean, you become this human that you didn't even know you were capable of becoming.
She has major anxiety now, like medical anxiety. So getting a CT scan or an MRI, she's just had so many.
When we got through the first wave of things, the first round of treatment, there was a time when we were on the knife's edge, and some bad news could have pushed us over pretty easily.
So the good news about pediatric cancer in the US is that medicine is improving survival rates. 90% of all the kids who get diagnosed each year will survive, and that rate is likely to get even better. But the family experience wrapped around pediatric cancer is not getting any better. There are serious challenges: financial, marital, siblings, housing, transportation. You get the idea. And to make matters worse, these problems don't really live anywhere. This isn't St. Jude's problem, and it's not Blue Cross Blue Shield's problem, and it's not Chase Bank's problem. So a bunch of smaller nonprofits have popped up all across the country to do what they can, and sadly, it's not much. They donate blankets and backpacks and day trips to Disneyland, but virtually no organization is helping with mortgages, job loss, or families in crisis. So we are. With designers and other big thinkers, we're trying to figure out now how to unlock the hundreds of millions of dollars that these families need.
There is a constraint on this kind of work that we can't change, but it's not what you think. You're limited by what other people are willing to adapt or embrace. It doesn't matter how good your idea is. If nobody falls in love with it, it's the wrong idea. As a UX designer, that's intuitive to me. Make it natural for other people to use, and they'll use it. And fall in love with the problem yourself. After Katrina, professional musicians in New Orleans were really struggling. If you've been there, you know that they're the best in the world at what they do. But they weren't making enough money to support their families. So the locals tried to help. They brought in a reputable nonprofit to teach them how to manage their money. And it was a terrible failure. Imagine that. Professional musicians in New Orleans and probably everywhere else sleep past noon, jam with their friends, play until 3 in the morning, and do most of that stoned. No judgment. Sounds like a great life. But if they wanted to be bookkeepers, they'd be bookkeepers. So at the request of the Grammy Foundation, our designers did what they do. Hang out at clubs until 3 in the morning, talk to musicians, talk to record labels, and talk to organizations who care about musicians. We went where the folks we're designing for were in order to understand them best. And we developed a solution called Tip the Band, a new way of paying musicians like you pay your waitstaff. And with music tourists contributing just $5 per visit to New Orleans, we could raise the standard of living by $10,000 per musician just by getting tourists to do what they're doing already and by not asking musicians to do anything that they're not. Here's another one. Social problems aren't math problems. Yes, you have to use your brain, but you also have to use your heart. As a designer, you probably get this. Leverage emotion, joy, sadness, curiosity, excitement, whatever. Make solutions moving and compelling and not just technically correct.
Sir! Sir! We've got trouble at the gate.
Maybe you've seen the movie Hotel Rwanda. Maybe you haven't. In either event, it's about the 1994 Rwandan genocide, where one tribe killed nearly 1 million members of another in 100 days. On the site of a mass grave in Kigali, the nation's capital, is a genocide museum. It's a smaller version of genocide museums around the world, like the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. These museums have a problem they don't know how to solve. They're great at teaching visitors about the horrific event, but they suck at getting people to care enough to get involved in preventing future horrific events. So our design team did what we do and interviewed everybody we could in Rwanda, and we uncovered something fascinating. The locals teach their children about the genocide differently than they teach tourists. They don't just focus on the tragedy, they focus also on the heroes who risked their lives to help. So we designed a new kind of museum experience, one that was 70% tragedy and 30% hope. We came to understand that the solution to the museum's problem was about feeling, not just understanding. Lastly, we want to say something about co-design. I'm sure you've heard or read about it. The idea of designing with the people affected by the problem and not just for them. It's design's version of DEI. On paper, it makes a whole lot of sense, but we have a caution. Yes, the people affected by a social problem should absolutely be engaged before, during, and after the design work. But remember, they're not designers. They're not wired like you are, which we laid out before. So don't offload the design work to them. Don't limit solutions to what they can imagine or see. Absolutely work with them, but you do the design work.
As long as we're talking about design trends, let's talk about social design programs. There are more and more of them every year. I developed one at USC. But here's what you need to know. They are not a prerequisite for doing the important work of solving social problems. In fact, they may be an obstacle. Let me explain. If you look at their curricula and at their students, they're preaching a rather limited sermon to a rather limited congregation. We don't just need to design better solar panels or better recycling bins. We need to think way bigger about what it would take to reverse climate change, about how to leverage business or government or lots of things that designers don't learn about. Here's the bottom line. Whatever your expertise now, whatever your experience now is valuable.
I've been a designer for a couple decades now. And at about the time that Jeff and I started UX for Good, design got really hot. Design went from something that our parents didn't understand, some still don't, to something that MBAs really wanted. It was great. Organizations came to believe that design was a must-have, a competitive differentiator. So we had more influence and made more money. But in the past few years, MBAs have got bored and moved on. And now design is increasingly marginalized. Designers aren't invited into the halls of power and are fighting over scraps. Maybe what we're talking about today, enlisting designers to help solve the biggest, most important problems, will help fix that.
We hope we've inspired you to get involved in saving the world. And if so, here are a couple of things you can do.
Join us in our work. Reach out and tell us you want to help, and we'll figure out how to leverage your genius.
And tell the AIGA that you want more from us. Tell them you want us to run a workshop at the annual conference next year in LA, where we'll all get together, dig in, and do the work.
Either way, thanks for being a designer. The world needs you.